Welcome to Slight Reliability, the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Stephen Townsend. Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn about SRE and observability and now DevOps 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever at a time. Today, I am joined by Amin Astaneh once again. Amin, how are you doing?
Doing great, Stephen. How are you?
I am good. I'm settling into the new year and my new role and slowly getting into the rhythm of things. How about you? What are you up to, man?
Oh, the same. I'm in Florida right now as a nomad. As I mentioned the last time I was with you, I wander the United States, so I figured I would go to a place that is warm. So I'm currently in the Tampa, St. Pete area, working as a consultant still and enjoying that lifestyle. And, half the time I'm in, corporate apartments like I'm in right now, and half the time I'm at a campsite, close to the beach. It's living the dream.
That's so cool. Have you got a favorite place that you've been to in the States, or a place you've thought, wow, I could live here?
Yes. So I've been in St. Petersburg on and off for the past month because that's like where a lot of the really awesome beaches are. And it's a totally different energy than Tampa. I grew up in Tampa, and having that contrast and hanging out in a place that's more relaxed is very refreshing to me. So out of the two options, I think I would be looking at St. Pete if I were to choose where to live, because I'm wandering to find where I want to settle. So it sounds like St. Pete is a lead, surprisingly, even though I grew up in the area.
That's cool. I haven't been to almost anywhere in the States, but I'd love to do what you're doing and just travel around a bit at some point. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Absolutely.
And how about your work? What's been happening in your consulting work? What have you been working on?
Yes, absolutely. So Certo Modo hit 1 year in January. I'm still at it. I have a long-term client. And currently I've been working with them on basically toil management and monitoring and metrics and incident response and all of the SRE fundamentals. It's fun doing it for a smaller company because you feel like a magician just going in there and teaching them all the new things. So that's been the general experience. But specifically, lately, I've been introducing a new piece of technology to their stack called Concourse, which is a CI/CD system. They call it a open source continuous thing doer. And the way that it is different from, let's say, Jenkins, because I think all of us have used or been aware of Jenkins in one way or another, is that all of the pipeline configurations are in YAML and tasks are executed locally within a container. And those containers can be configurable with whatever image you want and whatever commands you want inside. So you have this very flexible system to construct CI/CD pipelines or jobs to execute in lieu of running scripts yourself.
Did you say that's open source as well?
Yes, it is. There are numerous companies that are funding its development, and they even have like a governance process, which I found very refreshing. So that's one of the reasons why I selected the use of Concourse, because I knew that it would be open source and, it isn't like funded or by a SaaS or something where they can take control or, extract money when it's not appropriate.
So just before we started recording, I admitted something embarrassing. I, up until very recently, didn't really know what continuous integration or CI was. I thought it was about making sure you're deploying code into integrated environments with real endpoints, or at least mock endpoints or something like that. I didn't quite get it. So can you explain again in simple words, what is CI?
Right. CI, aka continuous integration. I think the way that I would describe it to a layperson or like explain as
Like
if I'm
me.
5 years
Yep.
old.
Yep.
Yeah, you're not 5 years old, but like, yeah, I think you get it. So we have changes that we want to make to our code base, right? There is a branch or a state of the code base, which is always the latest set of changes. And those are the changes that are vetted and have been tested. So CI is the practice of making your batch of changes to the code base and testing and verifying that it is ready to be included in the latest version of the code base. And you're doing this process all the time. And ideally, you're using automation to continuously vet the state of the changes you're going to apply, as well as continuously vet the state of the latest version of the code base. So you want to know all the time that the code base that you're potentially shipping to prod is in a good state, that unit tests work, that style and code linting is good, that your integration tests or your unit tests are in a good state. So that way you always have a green version of your code to push to prod.
Okay, so it's not just about getting it merged into the main or master branch, but all the way to production, getting that particular feature or change to production as well. Is that right?
I have to provide a subtle answer. So we're really just talking about the state of that code.
Okay.
So like you want to make sure that the main branch is green. All the tests are green.
Yep.
But we haven't even really talked about the act of pushing it to production. Now that's a completely different skill,
Sure.
Which is CD, continuous delivery. So that's the practice of, okay, I now have, a main branch of my repository. We're keeping it in a green state, but there's changes that are going into it all the time. How do I, in an automated fashion, ideally, push those changes to prod? And there's different tools and strategies and ways that you go about doing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So on the CD side of things, that is something that's been on my mind recently. I think a lot of organizations have, especially non-tech organizations, not traditionally tech ones, have quite rigid controls in place about getting from, even for some of the non-prod environments, like getting to a pre-production environment maybe, or a UAT environment, have a lot of controls and approvals and processes and things like change advisory boards to get it to production. And, which from what I have read, we shouldn't do that. It doesn't help in any way. But anyway, have you ever seen a company go from that kind of manual approval process where there's a lot of people involved, a lot of control and governance, to embracing or enabling automated flow or semi-automated flow through to production? And how do you even begin to explain to, say, a non-technical stakeholder group or some executives that this is a worthwhile thing to do and it's not going to introduce unnecessary risk?
Wow, what a question. That could take an entire episode to answer, because there's a lot. There is a ton of material that we can go over. So to speak to my personal experience, a couple of things. One, as you know, I previously worked for Meta, and the team that I was a production engineer on was, one of the teams was the CD solution for the company. So that was the opportunity for me to see the ideal state where your code is being, there's build artifacts being built all the time, and they're going out to prod all the time, and you get automatic reverts if health checks fail, and so on and so on and so on. So I saw, in the time that I worked on that team, the team was called Conveyor. I think I can publicly say that because there's like papers and stuff about it. But I had a glimpse of what the future for many, many companies would be, or at least the ideal state, because that's really cool, right? Like planetary scale CD system. Now, as for, my other experiences, like starting from the other side. So when I was spending time working at Acquia as an operations person and as a SRE and SRE manager and so on, there was a period of time where a cab was introduced. And the cab was introduced as a reaction to a big incident, and the leadership wanted pretty tight controls over what was hitting production. And I was in the enviable task of launching and running the cab.
Wow.
So yes, it was a pretty challenging time. And my role, or at least my personal mission, while I was doing that, was how do we get out of it? And cabs they tend to be a function or an artifact of, let's say, ITIL, which is a four-letter word for an IT process. I call it a four-letter word because it is kind of like a curse in my book. But it's I
agree.
Yeah, it's a change control process, and actually just a way to operate services where, okay, for large organizations where they're trying to manage risk explicitly, okay, I can understand the appeal. But for us SRE and DevOps practitioners, since you're bringing that scope into your podcast now, it can actually slow down flow, increase lead time of changes to production, which is of course not a good thing. So did I see the full transformation from cab to Elysium? No, but I do remember taking part in creating the idea of a standard change, which is ITIL language for what are the changes that we're making to production that we know are safe, and being able to give engineering teams the means to be able to clearly demonstrate that, oh yeah, this is a standard change. Right. It is a functional change, but we do know what the change does. We understand what success means. We understand what failure means. We know how to roll back, and we're shipping these things a lot. We have a good track record of success. We know what to do if things fail. And so creating a larger encompassing scope of the standard change is how you're able to navigate ITIL in a way where the things that you do need to stop and talk about, you do, but the things that are like business as usual, you are not losing as much velocity.
Yeah, the standard change, I've heard about that before, and it makes sense to me. Yeah, anything which follows a sort of business as usual, low risk pattern. But I was wondering with the cab at Acquia, who were the stakeholders involved? Who were the decision makers, and did they have the technical knowledge to make informed decisions?
Yeah, good question. I think it's on the border between technical and non-technical. I think what you end up with is people that know how to speak the language and also have understanding of the business context, but not always technical. So from what I remember, the way that it worked is that, the engineer, or in some cases, the product manager, would go to the cab and say, okay, I have this change that I propose to submit to prod. And the folks that are on the board that are, providing feedback, asking questions, would consist of myself, but let's put myself aside because I'm an outlier, the head of operations, right? Who was a senior director at the time. I think he was like the Lorax. He was speaking for the trees and just making sure that we're doing all of the things that we should do when we're doing a change to production. Like, we do have monitoring. We do know what the change does. We do know how to measure success. All those things I mentioned earlier. We're just making sure that due diligence has been done. But there are also sometimes there are engineering VPs, and the reason why that might sometimes happen, or like senior product people that might sometimes happen, is if there's a discussion around the nature of the risk or the acceptance of the risk. Engineering managers were present as well, sometimes to speak on SWE's behalf if they need help articulating that. So I think to answer your question, there are moments where people that attend the cab or preside over the cab aren't fully technical day to day, but of course they are required to at least understand the business impacts of the changes, or at least be able to answer general questions about the technical aspects of them.
Yeah, I guess something else I'm really interested in with CI/CD, same as it's become the theme of this episode, is observability of CI/CD. So you obviously get to a point where if you build enough automation and it's your business depends on it to get features from A to B, to get it flow through a value, it's like your key value stream at a certain point. Have you got much experience, or have you seen, or any advice around making that I guess the automation part of it, observable, visible, making sure it's healthy. Like what do you monitor? What do you look at, and how do you treat that as opposed to the state of a microservice or a traditional system?
I think that we have to consider CI automation, even if we're just talking about a Jenkins box. I think it's important that we are saying that, look, it is an important part of the value stream, like you just said. And so there are certain aspects of it that we do need to monitor. And I would be looking at it as if, I put my SRE hat on. I'm going to be looking at it as if it were a production service, because again, it is a key part of the value stream. So I would be thinking, okay, is a CI/CD service up? In terms of capacity planning, are we, or utilization, saturation, errors, are we, maxing out the resources on this machine? Do we know that the pipelines that we've configured for it, have they run recently? So actually, a concourse doesn't have native monitoring to track the last time that a job got triggered. Not easily queryable. So I had to add some additional metrics using the Prometheus push gateway just to be able to say, yes, this thing got triggered, 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago. And if I don't see it triggered for more than an hour, I'm going to throw an alert, because I know that I depend on this automation to run. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the last time it was triggered. Also, in terms of your pipelines, like, you want to make sure that they're successful. So, taking a step back from, just plain CI/CD, but just task execution. Like, yes, you want to make sure that your scheduled tasks, like, basically cron jobs, glorified cron jobs, that they are running successfully and consistently. So, you care also about latency. You might find that over time, the latency of, or, the execution time of your tasks is monotonically increasing. Maybe it's because it's dependent on a data set that's monotonically increasing. So those are things you want to pay attention to. And then, of course, for back to the whole CI concept, you definitely want to be actively monitoring and being proactive in investigating failures of your pipeline, especially the pipeline that is tracking, the main or formerly known as master branch, because you want to keep that green at all times. Mm-hmm. I've seen teams that have been, I guess, complacent in responding to issues with, the state of the main branch, and it bites them in the butt, because they end up dealing with a lot of toil trying to get main into a healthy state, so that way they have a build artifact that they can then push to prod. So all of those things are really, really important. But I think from like the DevOps point of view, making sure that your main branch is green, like breaking the build, we're still making sure we don't break the build. And when that happens, it might as well be an alert, and the engineering team should be alerted to respond to it, because right now your value stream has been interrupted.
You and I are going to chat to Sebastian Wietz and have a bit of a panel discussion in the near future. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is reliability of non-prod environments. So I don't want to cover that too much today, but I did have a conversation with someone at work recently, a principal engineer, who was talking about this idea that we shouldn't, by the time you deploy your code to some environment that's outside of your workstation, the quality of that should already be thoroughly validated. We shouldn't be using these environments that we go and deploy to prove that our code works. They should already be done. And I think that's a mindset shift for some teams and some people, where they think, I write the code, I deploy it, and then someone will test it or test it there, And at that point, it's starting to impact people, and it costs money to have these environments if you're, even if you're spinning them up on demand.
That is actually a subject of debate.
Really?
Because you have, well, sure. I think what I'm talking about really is testing and production. Right. So there is the school of thought that, you should have a good CI system, but you should be continuously pushing your changes to prod, and you should be having, very high signal to noise in terms of your observability. And if you're having problems, you should be able to revert those changes. I think that would be probably I could say that with some confidence that is like the perspective of like the charity majors of the world. Test and prod is her mantra. And the reason why that is, a very tempting I'm not demonizing or saying that's a bad idea, but I think the reason why such a decision would be very tempting is that there's going to be such a difference between your test environment, quote unquote, and production, because production is where the actual load is going to. Mm-hmm. So you're never going to really know what's going on with your code unless you have it in prod. So having, fast feedback, like a really tight feedback loop, being able to observe quickly, being able to make changes to prod quickly, removes the necessity of you being able to have like a dev stage prod process.
I guess it also comes down to the maybe the core lesson from the Phoenix project, which is that the smaller the batch of change that you're releasing, the lower the risk as well. So if you're continually pushing to production, the risk is relatively low, provided you're surrounding it with things like you said, being able to roll back rapidly, the right observability, all of the pre-checks through all of your automation beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. Single piece flow, I think would be the ideal state, because you're right, like the context or the scope of the change that is hitting production is so small and easy to reason about that you have an understanding of what risk each change to prod will be. This kind of goes back to the whole standard change thing earlier. So yeah, that all makes sense. And again, like flow, feedback, experimentation, yeah, the practice of having those tools in place, observability in place, the ability to revert in place, it is a software aided 3 ways of DevOps. I can see the parallels.
The last thing around CI/CD that I wanted to cover is, and this is, maybe it's just me, but I have this kind of, when I hear the word CI/CD, I kind of cringe a little bit, because I've worked and seen so many teams who were so tool focused. They just focused on implementing these tools, whether it's Jenkins or GitHub Actions or whatever it is. Whereas shouldn't that just be the tool that's used to implement the CI or the CD bit? And it's the thinking around that which needs to happen as well, or is maybe more important than the tool that we use. I don't know. That's just my own experience throughout my career, as I've seen a lot of tools being thrown up that just automate a bunch of stuff. But it's like, well, but is this a robust process that we can trust? And is it getting value from A to B? And, those things aren't necessarily in place.
Right. I think that it is very important for us to know what our goals are, what our success metrics are, right? I'm sure the folks at Dora would give us a whole list of metrics that would be very useful for this sort of thing. And I think that Dora, would be a good start. Mm-hmm. But yes, I mean, we shouldn't choose tools just because, Hacker News touted them, right? It's important for us to answer the question, what is the business impact of us introducing, a particular tool or process to our value stream? And if you're able to demonstrate that, oh yeah, we're saving, an FTE or 2 FTEs worth of time because we've introduced this tool and we spent, a few weeks of work building it. Okay, well, you're able to make the business decision that is a good trade of that initial investment. I think that for anything, whether you're writing a feature or introducing a CI tool set, you need to be able to articulate those benefits, and then once implementing them, be able to prove them and be brave enough to go back to the old thing if you're not able to demonstrate the value.
Yeah, I remember it must have been 6 or 7 years ago at this point, working on a project, and there was a team who had created pipelines to stand up, to deploy. So there was a deployment pipeline, but which would also stand up the infrastructure as well. Like, it would spin up an environment and deploy the code into it. And this thing would take 2 to 3 hours, and it would fail 3/4 of the time. And you had to start the process again. And it was so frustrating. It's like, great, you've got some automation, but the outcome isn't there. Like, at that time, it was like, I need to do a performance test, and I've wasted half my day trying to run this thing which failed. So the outcome isn't happening,
I mean, if you're looking at it like a production system, right? Okay, you have a 25% reliability system, and your requests have a latency of 3 hours. That's not a great system to run. That's a problem. Maybe we shouldn't, use it. So like, I think the SRE adages or the SRE models of thinking apply to, our choice of tools and how we test and deploy our code.
Thank you. so much, Amin, for coming in and chatting to us today. We actually planned to have that panel discussion today, but Sebastian got called away on an emergency, which is the kind of thing that happens when you're an SRE. So that's life as an SRE. So we'll be catching up again real soon.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to have you have me.
This episode was sponsored by Squared Up. Squared Up combines your data with awesome dashboards, analytics, health roll-ups, and notifications into a unified observability portal. Using a data mesh architecture, Squared Up is a beautifully simple way to get instant access to the insights that matter whenever you need them. If you want to know more, head over to squaredup.com to sign up for your free account. Thanks once again, Amin, for coming on the show, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will see you all next time.